Hurricane Florence, and this, of course, wreaking havoc in the United States. Hurricane Florence weakened, but is still dangerous and has left residents stranded with floodwaters at the beginning of what could be days-long deluge. Now, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper says that Florence was set to cover almost the entire state in several feet of water. But for the latest now, we're crossing to our correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, good evening. Now, first and foremost, if you could just give us the latest update with regard to what has happened since Florence made landfall.
Sakina, you correctly point out that it has weakened. Remember, this was a Category 4 storm, and it was barreling its way across the Atlantic. The closer it got to the eastern seaboard of the United States, it weakened to a Category 2. It then impacted the states of, as you can see behind me, of North Carolina and South Carolina as a Category 2 and has since weakened to a Category 1. What does that mean? It just means that the wind volumes, whether you're talking about over 200 kilometers an hour, that has been now reduced to around 130 kilometers an hour, but that was never the big concern. The big concern with Florence is its trajectory and the pace at which it is moving. It is moving at between 3 and 5 miles an hour, essentially under 8 kilometers an hour. For a hurricane, that is very, very slow. So what does that mean? That means that because its trajectory is so slow, because its movement is so slow, the major concern here is flooding. It is the rain that is coming from above and the rain that is coming onshore as those winds push seawater on land. So the storm surge is very, very concerning. What we can tell you at this stage is that some 200 people in North Carolina have already been plucked by first responders. These are the stragglers, Sakina, those that do not heed those warnings, those mandatory evacuation orders that say get out. If you're in low-lying areas along the coastline, this is not a good place to be. Move inland. Some people, of course, saying that they will stay. They will run it out, hunker down in their homes, and of course finding themselves trapped by rising storm surge, by rising flood waters. The big concern now is the trajectory of Florence. As you can see, this is several hundred meters wide. The eye of the storm hitting North Carolina, just about there. The concern, though, right now, Sakina, is that it might dip back into the Atlantic Ocean. So the trajectory, it has now gone on land and might dip back into the Atlantic Ocean, which means it can then regain some of its energy. It can then regain, strengthen, essentially, and then do a double hit on into South Carolina. After that, the concern is, as you move inland into mountainous, hilly areas, mudslides and landslides, that's a big concern. So they're telling people to get away from mountainous areas. And then this is going to slowly meander up into the northeast. And eventually it will track back into the Atlantic above where we are here in New York. This is a very slow-moving system. But as it sustains itself across the inland, it will weaken. So there will be remnants of a Category 1 hurricane, but not essentially the ferocity which we are seeing in North and South Carolina as we speak.
Sherwin, I watched your update last night with Simpiwe on the Globe, and you were talking about the preparations that had been made for this particular storm. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that and how any of that, if at all, has kicked in as yet?
Well, there's a three-tier response here, Sakina. You have the federal government. We have states of emergency declared in a number of states. Essentially, that frees up federal dollars as and when they will be required. You have the statewide response. You mentioned the governor of North Carolina. You also then have various municipalities, local government that are involved. In addition to that, you have National Guardsmen that are deployed as backup to those first responders. Some 3,000 National Guardsmen, 500 of them have already been activated. And then it also becomes about the infrastructure concern. You know, you do have these sharp winds, they're tearing down branches, bridges become overwhelmed with flooding water. I was just looking at some visuals of the roof of a petrol station being ripped off. People live in trailer parks. They're very, very vulnerable to these sweeping winds. So this really becomes a first response, response, whether you're talking about law enforcement, whether you're talking about the fire departments that have been activated. activated, but then you also have these National Guardsmen that are there to give backup. So this is a three-prong approach. All hands on deck. We understand that the president is monitoring this very closely. I can tell you that FEMA has just tweeted something. Sakina, let me read you what they're saying. If you are trapped in a building, go to the highest floor. Do not climb into a closed attic. You might get trapped by rising floodwater. Get on the roof only if necessary. Imagine those are the 3 points that you might have to consider right now. Get onto the roof as required. The North Carolina Emergency Management Agency says stay indoors, do not venture out during the storm, do not drive or walk through stagnant or moving floodwaters. Of course, this is murky water that you cannot see through, so you might not know how deep it is or what lingers below the surface. If your power goes out, do not operate gas-powered generators or charcoal grills in or near your home. Have your emergency kit ready, and they give local emergency numbers that people can call. So, the warnings are very stark. Clearly, this is a moving situation. It is a fluid situation, excuse the pun. And as I mentioned earlier, all hands on deck.
And at this stage, Sherwin, how long is this hurricane expected to last for, the effects of it?
Well, this is the question, right? This is a very slow-moving system. As it approached landfall, Sakina, it slowed even further, between 3 and 5 miles per hour. That's under 8 kilometers an hour. And if you look back at Hurricane Harvey in the Houston metropole of Texas last year, he hovered around there for quite a few days. And the main concern, the main lesson from Harvey is not so much the winds that one expects with hurricanes, but the deluge, the amount of water that will be coming onshore from the storm surge, and as she lingers, based on the slow trajectory, how much water will be dumped by this hurricane. We understand some 14 millimeters. That's about, in South Africa, we use millimeters to measure the rainfall. 355 millimeters of rain has already been dumped in this area over here. And as we say, this hurricane can then track back into the ocean, regain strength, and then move back into South Carolina before she veers up into the northeast. So the big concern is how much water, and clearly this lowly journalist doesn't quite know exactly how slowly she will move. So anything from between 24 to 48, even 72 hours are some of the numbers we've heard.
Well, Sherwin, we'll leave it there, but I'm sure SABC News, we will check in with you later on some of the other shows as well. So thanks for that update, our correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. And do send us your comments to #FullView and also 30-second voice notes or videos to our WhatsApp line, and that number is 066 479 8056. And remember, you can view any of our interviews or features by going to sabcnews.com, or you can also find us on Twitter and Facebook. Well, we're going to go to a short break.